Thank you for listening to the Conform to Christ podcast, where we seek to engage the mind, affect the heart, and call people to follow Christ. My name is George Mays. I'm here with Jay Jones and special guest,
Good morning.
Parker Greene. And it is Text Driven Tuesday, and Parker is joining us this morning because he preached the sermon on Sunday.
That was a long time ago.
Was it? Slept since then. It is also Happy Bobby Bonilla Day.
Yeah.
When we're recording, anyway.
Yeah.
It's Bobby Bonilla Day.
Yeah.
July 1st.
He gets $1 million more dollars.
So I was actually looking. Did you know that he gets money from the Orioles also?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he
$500,000 a
gets
year.
$500,000 a year from the Orioles and almost 1.2 million from the Mets.
Yeah. How long does this last?
Let's see the payment. So Bobby Bonilla, for anyone who doesn't know, is a retired baseball player.
Yeah.
And he has deferred payments from these two teams. The payments started in 2004 from the Orioles and 2011 from the Mets.
And he hasn't played for them since then.
Yeah, and currently he's made $27 million
Yeah.
by not playing.
It's his retirement plan.
Yeah. The Orioles payment stops in 2028, and the Mets 2035.
Wow.
In 2035, he'll earn a total of $42 million.
Sounds like he had a pretty smart plan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's but Ohtani, he's probably going to get even more.
Yeah.
Sounds like the gig a lot of those college football coaches get that are fired.
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah,
Get paid to not coach.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So happy Bobby Bonilla to everyone who celebrates.
Yes, indeed. Well, we're second sermon in on our biblical family. Is that what we're calling this series? Biblical family? I can't
Marriage
remember.
and family.
Yeah. And Parker, you got marriage. So Ephesians chapter 5, if you guys want to go there, Ephesians 5, starting in verse 22. And that's where we're going to be today. So, no videos? No random things? Just going to get right into it
I
today?
don't have anything for you today. No, sorry.
I do have to note we're clearly missing one thing on the podcast. It is 4th of July week. Speaking of July 1st, we didn't get the American flag behind us.
Oh, my. Yeah.
We've got it over here in the
Can we
corner.
talk?
We've got it over here in the corner.
Can we just talk about
Do I need to get it?
No.
Do I need-
No, you don't. I mean, we love our country. Parker and I both served in the military, both veterans of foreign wars. Would do it again.
I've lived in the country.
Would do it again. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a patriot. You're a true patriot. Where if something happened in this country, I'm sure you would rally up, like most men. But we don't like sing songs to our country in church on Sunday.
Yeah, it's almost like, who are we here for?
That was Sunday. Everyone was doing that apparently in town.
Yeah, yeah.
They're singing the
Saw
national
a few.
anthem. They're singing the Army
Did
song,
the
Navy song. They sing
one
all.
I saw? They did the Pledge of Allegiance. That's how they started the service. Well, I guess I don't know. ROTC brought in the flag.
Huh.
They presented the flag, did the Pledge of Allegiance, sang the national anthem. Thought someone was going to say, "Let's play ball." Pass out some popcorn. They did like a 10-minute video of everyone in the church that has served.
Huh.
Like 10 minutes.
Wow.
I was sitting there watching this video. Oh, they did. They played all of the songs for each of the branches.
Yeah.
And if you served in that branch, you had to stand up. It seems. I was having a debate with someone about this. I feel like he was saying this is what the servicemen and women want. They want to be recognized.
Nah.
And I was saying it seems like torture.
Nah.
Like you have to stand up when we play this song. Like it seems more like it would be a hassle. Like it would be a day that you'd want to skip.
I mean, we already have Veterans Day to acknowledge veterans.
Mhm.
You know, 4th of July is 4th of July.
Right.
So, but the problem just comes down to, I think, just view of God. I mean, there was a time where I went to one of these churches in town that did that.
Mm.
And at the time, I would say I was brand new Christian, and I didn't really understand theology. I didn't really understand the Bible or what worship was at all. And so I was just like, kind of like, that's interesting. I didn't think it was like wrong, or I didn't think it was cool. And there are a lot of people that I think that are like that in these churches. They're like, what's wrong with that? But I think as I grew and understood more who God is and what worship is, it's just appalling to me now. It's absolutely appalling. Like, Sunday worship is to worship God.
It is a distinctly American thing.
Yeah.
Listening to this podcast, I know people that have always heard some conversations about the variety of food that we have in this town.
Uh-huh.
And that just points to the different cultures and ethnicities, just the different people. And you brought it up earlier in a previous podcast, like, we get exchange students that come here.
Yeah.
So when they come into our church and maybe they're coming from a country that's had a lot of strife, a lot of hostility towards Christians, and then they're going to see an American flag. And they have that in China. They put the Chinese flag, and it's a state-sponsored church, and the church preaches what the state lets them.
That's
And
right. Yeah.
It sends a message.
Yeah. I mean, imagine you go to Russia. Russian ROTC marches in their Russian flag. Then they sing the Russian national anthem. Then they sing all the Russian branches thing. What are you going to think?
Right.
Like, this is a state church.
Yeah.
This is a propaganda state church. That's where their allegiance lies. Like, you got to think about that stuff. But the most offensive thing is this is the time during the week where we all gather to worship God.
Right.
So we don't need to be singing songs about our nation. Like, if you want to have a special service to honor the men and women who served in your church, like all of them going back to World War II, there are a few of those around.
Mm.
Do it on a Saturday. Do it on a Saturday night. Do it on July 4th. I mean, do it. Have a big party. You know, I'm all about that. You want to have a big 4th of July party and, you know, blow stuff up. That's a good American time. You know what I mean? But
Are you having flashbacks, Parker, to the last time the church
Yeah,
blew
yeah.
stuff up?
Well, George, I was going to ask you, and I'm glad you brought it up. Like, what would be the argument for having it? And, you know, you said, well, people are saying it's because the service people want it. I can distinctly remember being in the service in wartime, and I enjoyed going to church to focus on God and just not worry about my daily work,
Right.
not worry about anything else, just focus on a God who is sovereign over all the world affairs that we had. Obviously, Jay and I served during the Iraq time frame in the early 2000s, and you know there were some people that had mixed feelings on it. I remember sitting in Iraq watching the news and like thinking, this is not what's going on over here at all. And you know, coming back to that, even when I had the opportunity to go to chapel there, it was nice to just like put it away and focus on God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think what you do in worship, this might maybe hurt people's feelings, but I probably needed to hear it back when I was younger. What you do in your worship service reveals what you worship.
It is sending mixed signals when you put all the church service I saw. It was 40 minutes before they sang a hymn.
Like a Christian hymn?
A Christian hymn, yeah.
Yeah.
They sang like "My Country 'Tis of Thee" and
Any Battle
Something
Hymn of the
else.
Republic?
I didn't hear "Battle Hymn of the Republic," thankfully. But no, it was like 40 minutes before they sang a hymn, and then but the entire time, every time someone would get up, they were like trying to convince everyone we're here to worship God. We're like that's the most important thing. But then up front, 40 minutes of patriotic stuff. Yeah, it's sending mixed signals. People aren't listening to what you say; they're watching what you're doing, and what you're doing is putting American patriotism above your worship of God.
Imagine if you're like an unbeliever and people have been asking you to come to church for a while, and like you're curious, like maybe you're being drawn somehow, by the Spirit. You've heard the gospel, and you finally are like, you know what? I'm built the nerve up. I'm going to go to church, and you just so happened to go this past Sunday, and you didn't get Christian worship,
Right.
and likely didn't get a Christian sermon. I haven't like surveyed around, right? But
no.
let's be honest. Yeah.
the one I saw, no.
Yeah.
And we like to say doctrine is important, and people will say, well, no, we just really need to focus on Jesus and love, right? But this shows where doctrine is important because it's a man-centered service, and it's a service where it's what can we do, I'm going to use the E word, to entertain people into being comfortable with the church, which is not how you call people to Christ.
I mean, I'm thinking about the first century church, and there were Christian soldiers.
Right.
And there were slaves, and there were all kinds of day laborers and all kinds of people in the church. I can't imagine the first century church having some kind of patriotic service where they're recognizing the Roman soldiers in the like. I would think that
And they march in the Golden Eagle.
That's right.
Yeah.
Set up their standards.
Yeah.
I would imagine. I mean, the glory of the church is that all of that stuff gets put aside.
Yeah.
Like there is no soldier or slave.
Wait, George, are you going to Galatians 3:28?
Maybe. There, like those distinctions actually fade away in light of the fact that we're all one in Christ.
Yeah. 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 Imagine. You know how like if you go in your kid's room, like maybe they're not doing like something atrocious, but they're doing something bad and they know they shouldn't be doing it. But you walk in, and you surprise them, and they're like, "Oh," you know what I mean?
Mm.
Imagine the Jesus returns, and we're all singing the army song.
We're all saying the
He like
pledge.
literally comes back at that moment, and hey, what are you guys up to? We're just grateful for our nation.
Yeah.
These leaders that you put in charge of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
How much longer do you think churches will do that here in America?
Until
Like conservative churches. Because it would be like in China, if you were to ask like the underground church, do you like say a pledge to
Are you asking?
to the president?
Are you asking if these churches are going to remain conservative?
Well, I mean that is part of it. I mean, how long in this nation can Christians be celebrating what the nation has become in the church service?
I think they're going to say we're the remnant,
we're celebrating what the nation was
and should be.
and should be. Yeah, that's how it will be justified. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or the ideals of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, what it should be always. Maybe something like that.
Yeah.
Because the world is watching.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Sorry.
Parker's got zingers. Yeah.
A little feisty.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's hop in that. Just remember, what you do in worship reveals what and who you worship.
Mm.
A lot of people just worship humans, man.
Mm.
And so their whole service is structured around what people want. So, well, let's hop in. Parker, you've got marriage. And how long you been married, George? Let's try to figure out how much. So if people are like, I don't want to listen to these guys talk about marriage. How long have we been married collectively?
It will be 20 years in October.
20?
20 years.
22 years. So we got 62 years up here. So surely
we're experts. Just ask our wives.
Yeah, we're experts. Surely we'll have some good advice, maybe. Huh? We'll see. 62 years. All right. Well, let's jump in. Let's go ahead and read the passage so people know what's going on. We're in Ephesians chapter 5. We'll start reading verse 22. Let's throw that up on the screen.
All right. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is head of the wife, even as Christ is head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. Who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband.
Hey, Jay, there's someone at your door.
Yeah, there is. My Ring camera popped up. Did you see that?
I did not know.
Yeah. Someone's at the door.
All right, so you started the sermon with a bunch of like marriage advice websites.
Yeah. There's
You just got, or what did you do? Just type in marriage advice and just see what came up?
the genesis of that was, I think my focus was on the egalitarian argument here, that this is antiquated, and people will say, well, this is no longer applicable, and there's better ideas out there. So I was looking at, what advice is out there for people. If people are taking this as just like maybe it's God's word, but this is kind of like the animal sacrifices. We don't do this stuff anymore. But yeah, I was thinking about, I'd been to the grocery store and thinking through this, just on my mind, and I realized, like, I didn't see the National Enquirer. Now, maybe they still have that at some of the grocery stores, but the ones I go to do not. And I was like, yeah, you used to see all these crazy magazines.
Oh, yeah. Bigfoot. Nessie.
But they had all these like lifestyle ones. So, to different like women, teens mostly.
Yeah.
And they'd have like how to have a better marriage, how to have a successful relationship, how to improve your home, all this stuff. And I was like, you don't see that anymore. So I was like, where is this? So that's how I stumbled on projecthotmess.com.
Well, I think that what you were getting at is that this isn't just advice.
Exactly.
And I think that what a lot of preachers do when they talk about marriage is they do give advice. You've got your 10 principles for a healthy marriage.
Right.
Yeah.
You get these series on marriage, and it's not really tied to a text. It's really, here's what you can do to have a happy marriage.
Right.
Instead of coming to a passage like this that is a lengthy passage on marriage and saying, here is what the Bible tells you to do, and it's not advice, it's instruction.
Command, yeah.
Right. There's imperatives here, there's commands.
Right, and that's really what I wanted to hit on, because in all those websites, and I did not take notes on them, I just kind of perused and looked and laughed a little. And there was nothing scriptural in there. There was several of those. There were several of those that had good tips, I would say. Some bad, but you didn't find anything scriptural in any of those.
And what you're going to see with these, 10 principles or whatever, is that it really is undergirded by the law, like their their law sermons. Like, do this and this will happen. And it's not undergirded by the gospel. This passage is all about the gospel.
Right.
Like, this is what you're supposed to do, because of what Christ has done. And it doesn't say if you do these things, then, well, you'll have a happy marriage and you'll never fight. And it doesn't say anything like that. It says, do this.
Right. It doesn't say, husbands, if your wife is submissive, then love her.
Right.
It doesn't say, wives, if your husband is loving, then submit.
Yeah.
I think it does imply that, as it's written to the church, that these are Christians and people that are pursuing Christ, but they're notably going to be imperfect. Hence, the instruction is given.
Mm-hmm. Right. I went to biblical counseling training and I wrote something down that they were talking about in the sessions about marriage, and you did this. You started looking at what came before this passage. This passage isn't in some kind of vacuum. It's connected to the rest of Ephesians, and what they said is that if you're not being filled with the Spirit, which is a big part of the beginning of Ephesians, this is what God has done for you, and you've been brought into the church, and you've been brought into union with Christ and seated with Christ in the heavenlies, and you've come to know Christ, so you should imitate Him. If you're not being filled with the Spirit, then Ephesians 5 isn't going to happen.
Right.
It's not just something that you can do in your own strength. It's something that God has to empower you to do. But then it says if something is wrong here in this passage, it's because something has gone wrong with chapters 1 through 5:21.
Exactly. And there's this was really 3 sermons, I think, crammed into one. So it was difficult to get all that in because Ephesians, it's a very rich book, and I'm glad that we're going to that next week with Philip because there's, I think, so much to mine out of that previous passage. I didn't want to take all of chapter 4 away from Philip, so trying to stick there. 5:1, turning back to it, be imitators of God, and then and 2, walk in love as Christ loved us. That's really the foundation, I guess, foundational for this passage is you've got to pursue Christ. You've got to walk in love. I had a friend many years ago. He was older and unmarried, and I was a newlywed. So, okay, we're talking 20 years ago.
Huh.
And he said he couldn't wait to get married because that would make life easier. That was my reaction. I was like, nobody, it's not. This labor, this love, this sacrifice gets so much harder. It's not about what you're going to get out of the relationship.
Just wait till you have kids, and then it gets real easy.
Yeah, it's super easy. Yeah.
The more people in the house, the easier it gets.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it came up. It might have been on one of your podcasts last week. I could be mistaken. There was a statement about, do you love your wife more than Christ? I can't remember where I heard this conversation. And I struggled with that as a young man. It's like, I've got to put all my eggs in this basket. But here we see in the scripture, you cannot, as a husband, love your wife unless you're pursuing Christ even more.
John Piper wrote a poem to his wife, I think, on one of their anniversaries, and it was something along the lines of love her more by loving her less.
Yeah. So love
And
more.
it was all about you love your wife more as you love her less than you love Christ.
Yeah.
As you're pursuing Christ, you'll actually love your wife more.
Mm.
Which is that's so backwards, right?
It is, yeah.
Did it end with, and if someone breaks in, good luck?
Did you pick up my reference
I
on
did.
that?
I did.
Yeah. That's another podcast.
Yeah, I was leaving his name out. I was leaving his name out of it.
Yeah. I think we talked about that before.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
We have.
So go back to episode. No,
Who knows what episode that is? Scroll down and through the hundreds.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. So you had a pretty simple, easy outline to follow. I texted you earlier in the week, and I was like, "Hey, man, how's your outline coming along?" And you're like, "Oh, it's pretty easy. Wives, husbands, the end."
Yeah.
So
follow the text.
right there in the passage. Yeah,
Yeah, it's just laid out for you.
yeah. I appreciate those. Don't try to be creative. Just give it to us straight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And one of the things I think I've always missed growing up is there's a focus there. Wives submit, husbands love, and we kind of push aside as Christ loved the church and how we as a family unit should be exemplifying that relationship between Christ and the church. And I think that gets lost.
It's interesting as I was looking at it, these two imperatives, wives submit, husbands love, and you were bringing up some things like he doesn't say this, he doesn't say this. And I was thinking, why does he say love? Why is that the one thing that he he hones in on. You said he doesn't tell wives to love their husbands. I was thinking that and it kind of clicked. If you go back to Genesis 3:16, it seems like he's addressing what went wrong
Yeah.
in the garden.
Yeah, and that's sadly I'm looking at the clock in the pulpit.
Yeah.
I wanted to highlight because I think we've got a very humble brag. I think we've got a solid church, and I think while our families are not perfect, I think we have a lot of families that are pursuing this in biblical truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that knowing I don't think we are without the possibility of families straying and going towards maybe we should define egalitarianism a little bit better, but essentially women pursuing the sinful desires that we all have in us, saved but not perfect yet. Going back to Genesis 3:16 and following and wanting that authority, wanting that role. I think we're always at risk for that.
Right, not submitting, and men's inclination is to be cruel.
Right. Genesis 3:16.
Cruel and domineering.
Your desire will be for your husband.
Yeah.
That he will lord over you.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's because of the fall, the marriage relationship is turned on its head, and now wives want to dominate their husbands, and in response, the husband is overbearing.
Yeah. Or he just becomes submissive.
Right.
Or the roles completely flip.
Yeah. And so it's not as if Paul's saying, wives, you don't have to love your husbands. I think he pinpoints those two words for husbands and wives because he's appealing to Genesis 3:16.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And he's saying because of the gospel, the curse is reversed.
Yeah. My old pastoral ministries pastor, Dr. Preston, the one I told you looks like Kentucky Fried Chicken guy, Colonel Sanders, looks just like him. Just needed a cane. He's real old school. Even has an accent. I'm like, this is weird. This is like we're going back in a Wild West movie. Got the curly mustache, gray hair. He said, and so far I think it has shown to be true. He said most of the problems you're ever going to experience in church are going to be caused by a domineering woman who will not submit to her husband. She tries to dominate in the church. And men that are passive and get dominated at home, and then they come to the church and they need an outlet to not be dominated, and then they overcompensate and try to dominate.
George, have you seen this?
Maybe once or twice.
Yeah.
I have.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. That's just, I mean, it's just that advice seems to be true. So, it's important. We're talking just about marriages here mainly, but it's in the context of the church. All of this fits into the life of being a Christian in the local church.
Right. And it really, I mean, you said this is controversial. It shouldn't be, but it is, because it talks about wives submitting to their husbands. Husbands are the head of the wife, and our culture doesn't like that. It is the anything you can do, I can do better.
Right.
And it's what Paul is doing is by appealing back to Genesis 3 is showing that this is God's design for marriage. Mm-hmm. This is not just his advice. It's not him saying, well, I've observed the culture and I'm going to give you a couple of, principles that you can try to apply and see if that turns things around. Like he is appealing to, here's the created order. This is what God has done. The husband is the head. He doesn't say that he might be if you let him or if he wants to be. He is the head, and wives are supposed to submit to their husbands, and that's the order.
And that's where I think a lot of the mainline churches want to take Galatians 3:28 out of context. There's neither male nor female.
Oh yeah.
And they want to say, well, that verse shows that this is antiquated and wrong.
Yeah.
Now, funny mention. I got a bunch of blank
Even though
looks.
Paul wrote Ephesians after he wrote Galatians.
I mean,
Right. Yeah.
that's oh man. So studying for this, and I don't know how many pages I just had to flip through where they're debating who wrote this and who wrote Galatians, and I'm thinking there's some professors out there that made way too much money debating some of this stuff and writing papers on it. It was crazy, and I think they'll latch onto that stuff as well. But Yeah, funny you mentioned the anything you can do, I can do better. I got a lot of blank stares, and then after the sermon, I thought maybe I should go on with a more modern song, like "I Am Woman, Hear Me Roar." I don't know, maybe.
Yeah. And when this is out of balance, like
Mhm.
people think that it's hidden when they come to church. It's not.
No.
You meet a husband and wife, like
Mhm.
you know who's in charge,
Right.
like in the first 5 seconds. It can't be hidden. So maybe this is a call out to men who
It
are
is.
submissive and passive. Like you're not fooling anybody. You know what I mean?
And don't swing. Don't overcorrect and
Yeah.
become.
Don't overcorrect and become domineering.
Domineering. Yeah.
But-
Shortly after moving to a town, I won't say where, but found a promising church online and made contact with them and called, and the husband picked up the phone, and I had a lot of questions about the church, and every question as he was answering, I could hear the wife in the background, "Don't forget to tell him this, don't forget to tell him this, don't forget to tell him this," and I initially laughed. I thought it was kind of funny. Had no clue who these people were, and then sure enough, got in that church and quickly found out who was running it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we want to walk through the passage and talk about this a little bit.
Yeah.
You got 3 key components of Christian marriage.
Yep.
Not advice.
Not advice.
This is what this is. I mean, Paul is just telling us what God's design
Mm-hmm.
for marriage is. It's God's good design. So you've got the call to the Christian wife, the command to the Christian husband, and then exemplify the church in marriage. Did I get them?
You did.
You got 'em.
Sweet. All right. I had a sneaking suspicion that we'd be doing a podcast, so I was like, I better take some good notes.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought yours because I didn't bring mine.
It's also important to remember for people, maybe you're listening and your marriage is out of balance and maybe take a lot of work to obey this, but to remember that when God gives these type of really commands, they're not burdensome, and they actually are meant for your happiness.
Right.
Like your happiness will always be found in as
Yeah.
closely as you can conform your life to what God's plan is for it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's for your happiness.
This would have been Adam and Eve's relationship in the garden before the fall,
Yeah.
and they were happy. It was good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the call to the Christian wife, the first 2 verses here, and we've got a dirty word here, Parker.
We do.
This is a word that people do not like.
Yeah.
Wives, submit.
I mean, really, anybody submit is a bad word in America.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We're Americans. We don't submit to anybody. You know, it's like we've got our national symbols, and one of them's probably the middle finger.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like not joking.
Yeah.
That's what we're known for.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
we told the king to go
Yeah.
get lost, and that's the spirit that
Yeah.
endures.
Don't tread on me.
Yeah.
Right.
And so submission is not seen as a positive.
Right.
It's seen as weakness.
And so, as is necessary so many times when we come across a word, we need to define it. What does submission mean?
Mm.
Because it's taken to mean being a doormat.
Right.
So what did you?
Yeah, and I want to try and call that out and say, this is. I think I may have actually said that. Like, this isn't a just sit back and be a doormat. This is referring to the care, the physical safety, the spiritual leadership, the provision for the family. That's where this is going. It's not a because in the context that he's writing, that was the marriage. The woman had no rights. She was not to question anything, and I think I brought that up that the relationships were all out of balance. Where a woman who is caught in adultery, he could kill her on the spot, no trial, nothing, perfectly justified in doing that in that culture. Right. Whereas it was almost expected that men were going to have extramarital affairs. So a little bit out of balance there. So,
Well, in the Roman context.
Yes, in
the Greco-Roman world, not in the church world.
not in the church, no.
Yeah.
No.
Right.
And that's where it goes back to, verse 21, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. And you see that in the church. We submit to Christ.
Yeah, there's a couple of strands I want to pull on. The first is making sure we've got submission defined well. That it's not a husband. I mean, this is a personal, we could say, voluntary submission. Like, this is not the husband, like, shaking his wife. You will submit to me.
Right.
Like, that's not what Paul is talking about. It again, because it's not this domineering. It is something that the wife has to obey. But it's recognizing the order,
Right.
of the relationship. Like, this is the way that God has structured the family, so that the husband is the leader and the wife is the helper. Right.
Right.
I mean, I'm looking up the word submit, and we do see it in the church. The church is called to submit to their leaders. That doesn't mean that the leaders can just domineer
Right.
over the church, right? It's the church recognizes the leadership structure.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, and you mentioned it's not transactional; it's relational, and you have to put the two together and look at them in combination. Where the husband loving her should be in such a way that she wants to submit, and she has no problem submitting. Doesn't mean there won't be problems, but there should be you know what, I trust you on this. There should be a spirit of unity.
Yeah.
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 I was going to say that the husband is the head, and this is kind of what it flows from. It's not like if your husband fulfills like what God tells him to about being a husband, then he's the head. It's that he is the head. So you can have a good head and you can have a bad head, but your responsibility doesn't change whether he's good or bad. And I think back to military times. I had an absolute garbage commander. Right, I was his executive officer. Worthless. But I still had to submit to him. Right. Now, obviously, you have to to certain degrees, but it kind of helps me to understand because I'm not a woman, but right. So I can't know what this is like, but I can know what it's like in this sense, that no matter who was my commander, I was to submit to that person and try to help them to be the best versions of themselves. So he was not a good commander, but in my submission to him, my submission's aim was to help to assist him to become the best version of himself. Very difficult when he was a little tyrannical and not good and knew he didn't care about me or any of the soldiers. But then I got a different commander, but my role never changed, but he was a good head. And so that submission was very easy and made it very happy and very joyful. And it was fun to try to help him to be the best that he could be. And so, yeah, women should see that this way. The reality is, in God's order and design, the man is the head, whether he's a bad one or he's a good one. And kind of a wife's role in that submission is to care for and help so that that head can be the best version of themselves possible. And a lot of times, the person that's under someone like that, the closest to them, can have a profound influence on them by their serving that person, can change the person. And I think that's what we see, and we can read about that in Peter. For wives that don't have good husbands, they can, by their conduct, they can win them to the Lord, things like that.
Funny you mention that. I actually just turned there because I mentioned that it says this, not that. It doesn't say wives submit to your husbands if he's loving.
Right.
And you're exactly right. I don't think I quoted the scripture, but 1 Peter 3, likewise, wives, be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives when they see your respectful and pure conduct. So, Peter hits right on that it's not always going to be a perfect marriage.
Right.
Well, I mean, he's talking about wives, Christian wives who have unbelieving husbands, and he doesn't say, you don't have to submit to them because they're not Christians.
Right.
Like, he tells them to submit so that they might become Christians. I like the way that you described it, because that is what Eve was supposed to do for Adam. Adam is given the task to work and keep the garden, to expand it, and it was not good for him to be alone. He can't accomplish this by himself, and so God builds a woman for him, and she's a helper,
Right.
who is. Who comes alongside and helps him to accomplish his goal.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be out of whack if now Eve like starts putting her husband down and trying to usurp his authority. Then everything is it's all going to go into chaos, which is what we see today
Right.
in marriages and churches and just society in general.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
I did want to pull on this thread because you mentioned verse 21, which is a verse that egalitarians who say that, well, there's no like submission. It's
Mutual.
it's mutual submission. So verse 21 says, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ. And so they would say, well, the husband is not like the leader; like he doesn't have authority. They're partners. They're co-equals, and they're supposed to submit to each other. What do we? How do we respond to that?
Well, I always read that as verse 21 being in a portion that has to do with relationships with people within the church, not as between husbands and wives. So that I'm thinking of Philippians, where we're told to put others' needs before our own, like very practical advice. That's what it looks like to like submission. Like maybe there's two options in the church, and we have two ideas of where we need to go. And I really believe I'm right, and I don't think you're right. So what God tells us is not to pursue an ambition to have my way, but be willing to submit to other people in the church. And that's how I read verse 21, that's in the context of relationships within the church as a whole. Then he switches gears into the family unit in verse 22.
Yeah, I've always seen that as going back to Galatians 3:28, and then starting in 22, then we're going from church down to family.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
I agree.
It seems fairly obvious, too.
But I have heard, I've heard people say, well, it's supposed to be mutual submission between husband and wife. But I mean, you see this, I mean, just in practical ways. I mean, you work someplace, and there has to be a leader.
Yeah.
Right. It can't just be, well, what do you want to do? It's the vultures from Jungle Book. What do you want to do? I don't know. What do you want to do? It's like someone's got to eventually be like, this is what we're going to do, and the other person has to submit.
Yeah.
Right. Well, in the marriage relationship, the leader is the husband, and the wife is the helper who is supporting him, and sometimes he might make dumb decisions. Right. But the wife can help him to be the best husband that he can be.
Right.
Right.
We had a family friend that worked in retail and got fired. Got fired because there were products that needed to be displayed. I think good selling products, and this individual wanted them, or thought they'd be best displayed in a certain area of the store. The store manager disagreed and said, "No, move them back." Well, moved them back, they didn't sell as well. So this individual moved them where they sold better. This happened a couple times, and then manager's like, "You're not listening. You're fired." And some family and friends like, "Man, that's just so horrible. She was making a good call, doing a great job, helping the business, but she wasn't doing what her boss told her."
Right.
So somebody's got to be in charge. You can't just cross that line.
But that I mean, I think that plays into the marriage relationship, that the husband also should listen to his wife.
Yeah.
I think that plays into the loving your wife, is that you God has given her to you as a helper, so maybe receive the grace that God has given you in a wife who is trying to help you.
Yeah, and conversely, got to tell an Army story, Jay. There was a major that could have been named Major Payne, because he was. That wasn't his name, but he was very difficult, you might say overbearing, and there was a fellow lieutenant that worked for him, and we all pitied this guy. And I asked him, I was like, how do you do this? Because this guy is asking a lot. Some of it's unreasonable. And he said, well, I give him the best advice that I can, best input, obviously study what we're doing,
Right.
present facts as clearly as I can. Occasionally he takes it, says, yeah, we're going to change things up. But when he doesn't, I execute his plan as violently as I can. He puts everything he can into doing what this major said. He said, if it works, then I've just learned something. If it doesn't work, it wasn't for my lack of effort. And I learned from that.
And the buck stops with the major.
Yep.
So there's a lot of freedom in that, I think, too. Yeah. But you're right, George. When we talk about the woman and God's design for a woman, any man that's got a wife and he doesn't listen to her, you're just a fool.
Yeah.
You're an absolute fool. It's the closest person in your life. You've gone through life together, hopefully. And they have a lot of wisdom. And women have a lot of wisdom and insights because the way God has designed them, and they're able to see things from certain angles and pick up on different type of dynamics in relationships that are completely lost on men. And you're foolish if you don't listen. And women should also, I think, strive to be the type of Proverbs 31 woman who's considered wise, considered a force multiplier, because that's how she's presented, as a force multiplier for her family. And people will call you blessed because you're married to this type of woman. And so try to be that type of a woman that is shrewd. We're to be shrewd as serpents and non-gullible. And you are an asset to your husband. And your husband wants to take your advice.
Yeah. That's what Boaz saw in Ruth.
Yeah.
Which I like that you brought it up for the singles, for those who are looking to get married, young people. What kind of woman should they try to be, and what kind of man should they try to be looking for, and vice versa? What kind of man should these young men strive to be, and what kind of woman should they look for? It's these kind of people.
Yeah, it's too late if you look for someone that has the same hobbies and same interest, and then say, okay, now let's go to church and have a family, and how's that going to work?
Well, I mean, maybe I'll get in trouble, but I'll get in trouble with you guys. If you if you're dating a girl and she's overbearing and she's always trying to like domineer over you, that's not going to change on the wedding day.
Right.
And the same if you're dating a guy and he's a jerk and he's domineering, or if he's passive and he never wants to make any decisions or take any kind of leadership responsibility, that's not going to change on the wedding day either. And so be wise in who you are dating and only date someone that you could see yourself marrying.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to add to that, look at how they operate in church. Are they teachable? Whether it's guy or girl, are they teachable? Are they actively pursuing Christ in some way? I mean, if we're talking teenagers, like we don't see them with stacks of commentaries. But do they have an interest in Scripture and want to know more? And
yeah, this is why Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7, only marry in the Lord. Don't date a non-believer because you aren't supposed to marry a non-believer.
Right. And
if you violate the instructions of Paul, you'll face the consequences.
Right.
And there are consequences. I don't think that if you marry a non-believer, he'll come to faith sometime.
Yeah, and you still don't get out of the reality that he's your head.
Yeah,
he's the head of your family.
Yeah,
and so these instructions apply.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How does that go, George? Oh, it'll be okay. I can change him. Isn't that the?
Yeah, what missionary dating?
Yeah, that's it.
Don't do that. That's dumb.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else with the wives before we go to the husbands? Because the husbands get more verses, like you said.
Well, I would say like submission doesn't mean you don't give. Think about like the president, right? Who does he want around him? A bunch of yes men, or people who will give him pushback.
Yeah.
And it's good, honest feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And it may be the exact opposite of what he wants to hear, but that doesn't mean that person's not submitting.
Right.
So women shouldn't look at it that way.
Right.
And men shouldn't receive it that way either. Or they're, maybe they're very insecure and have other issues, but women should be able to push back and say, I disagree. I really think this is why, this is wise. This is why, these are the reasons why. Like, you're not being a good wife if you think submission just means sitting in the corner and going, yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Let's do that.
Right.
Like, that's not being a good biblical wife.
No.
Yeah.
Well said.
Next to the husbands.
All right. Command to the Christian husband.
This
Love your
one-
wife.
Yeah, simple.
Well, it's interesting. As I was, you look at it and you're like, well, that's a weird command. Love your wife. And I think it's because we live in the Hallmark generation where love is this feeling. Like, husbands feel a certain way about your wives.
Right.
Love is, and then he goes on and he gives a bunch of things that Christ has done for the church, like actions. So he's not telling husbands to just feel mushy about their wives all the time. He's telling them to do something, live a certain way.
It's more than roses and chocolate candy.
That's right. Those are easy things, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what he describes Christ doing, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. What did he do? Giving himself up for her. He died for her, right? It's easy to give flowers. It's hard to die.
Yeah.
And I don't know who I heard this from. It's really easy for a husband to say, I'd take a bullet for my wife. But what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
But
Like,
would
it's easy to
Yeah,
physically die for someone, but will you die to yourself when you? And I mean, I'm talking to myself here. You have a long day at work, and you come home, and there's the kids are screaming, and the wife's trying to get dinner ready, and the trash needs to be taken out, and there's it's chaos, and all I want to do is flop down on the couch and play some video games. Like, it's easy to say, well, I'd take a bullet for my wife. Will I, take out the trash for her?
Yeah.
Like, will I die to what I want to do in order to serve her on a daily basis? That's the hard stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and that was the hardest part for me, is looking at this like, man, I got a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Right.
So often we like you said, we preach to ourselves, and that, try to pull on that string a little bit in the sermon. What did Christ do? He gave his life for the church, but are we willing as husbands to your point, listen to what our wives have to say, listen to what they need, be observant.
And maybe maybe your wife has a better idea than you, and you're going to have to swallow some pride to go, you're right. Let's do that. Let's do that.
That would be loving.
That would be dying to yourself,
Yeah.
which is harder than taking a bullet. And maybe literally for some men.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And what's interesting too, and I can't remember where I first heard this a long time ago. It's like the commands God gives they're not only like, this is the best way for the family to operate and marriages to operate, 'cause it's my design in the garden. It seems to really be what each person needs the most, right? Men, we need to feel respected, right? Which is what the women are called to do, to respect and submit to their husbands. And women need more than your respect. They need to know that you actually do love them.
Right.
And that seems to be their greatest need. So God is telling us to fulfill the other person's greatest need. And I think it's true.
And just as the wife is the helper for the husband to help him be the best leader he can be, here, husbands are supposed to love their wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the goal of the Christian husband is to help his wife become sanctified,
Right.
and help her be the best that she can be.
Right.
So it is a mutual love and service for each other.
Yeah, I mean, you guys can chime in if you want, but I haven't met in the Christian church a woman yet who had a loving husband who did not naturally and easily then fulfill her part. Now, as we said and we pointed out, even if you have a bad husband, you still have to. But if the husband is loving his wife as Christ loved the church, it just seems to be that they fall into it naturally, that they then respect and submit to their husbands. It's like it just flows easily for them. So yeah, I mean, that's if you're looking at your wife and you're like, "Man, my wife doesn't do this," maybe the problem's not her, maybe the problem's you, right? Maybe you're not.
I don't know if it's absolute.
It's not
But
absolute.
but in a general sense, I would say, the idea of submission, if we have a biblical understanding of what that means and what the roles and responsibility of husband and wife are, I think that as you're mutually being obedient, then it gets easier to do because you love your spouse because you love Christ.
Right.
And you're serving your spouse because ultimately you're serving Christ.
Yeah.
And it's you get joy out of it.
Right. Yeah, and it's like the order, like how salvation happens. Like God's love comes first, Christ's love comes first to us, and that's transformative. Then we don't submit perfectly to Christ,
Right.
but because we know that He does love us, then now obeying flows out of what He already has done. And I think it just trickles down.
Right.
Like with the love of Christ, the husband is about that, and he's receiving that. And now he's trying to do the same thing in his family and for his wife, and that then has a sanctifying effect on her as well.
As you're talking about Christ and the sanctification of the church and the husband being the spiritual leader, as I studied that, I went in my mind to passages about pastors and the judgment that pastors will receive for how they lead their church. And overlaying that with this, part of our judgment standing before Christ is how we lead our families. How did we love our wives? And when you think about how are you going to answer that before God, that's humbling. And I think that's something as husbands we need to recognize that we've been given a special duty. I mean, that's what I'm saying. This wife, your wife, I mean, that's an image bearer of God.
Mm-hmm.
That's not, we say, our wife. That's God's child.
Yeah.
And that's someone that God cherishes and loves far more than we could or ever will. And we have a special place to love as we're commanded.
I think one of the I don't even know how to describe it. One of the scariest verses maybe is 1 Peter 3:7. That husbands are supposed to live with their wives in an understanding way, as a weaker vessel. We don't have to talk about that right now. But we're supposed to do it so that our prayers won't be hindered. That's a hard verse.
Right.
Like the way that you live with your wife, the way that you treat your wife actually has an impact on your relationship with Christ.
Yeah.
That's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
We're we ought to freely love our wives, because we love Christ, and she's our neighbor.
Uh-huh.
And if she's a believer, then she's our sister. If she's not a believer, then we want her to be one. And how we treat her it will impact that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So no matter what it looks like, it doesn't let us off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have to live this way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not to go into chapter 6 there with children, but I appreciated that as you spoke in the baptism about Kennedy. This isn't just another kid in the church. This isn't a high five moment. This 14-year-old girl is now eternally our sister. And that's something, brought tears to my eyes, because I mean, how it is as a parent, seeing your kids, and then of course her testimony about her sister.
Yeah.
And to me, just viewing each other in the church that way, and as you just said, viewing our spouses that way, wives seeing their husband as a brother in Christ, and how that plays into this part about, we're sanctifying each other, and that should be our goal.
Right.
Because we got a lot of eternity left.
Yeah.
like we haven't even started yet. Yeah.
When I was a kid, I thought eternity was algebra 2.
Mm,
That's what it felt like.
Yeah.
that's probably the closest comparison that we have.
It really does go both ways too in the marriage relationship. But your spouse, before they're your spouse, they're Christ's bride,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't want to mistreat Christ's bride.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. Paul tells Timothy, treat younger women in the church as sisters, older women as mothers, older men as fathers, younger men would be brothers.
Mm-hmm.
But if we had that mindset, that should change the relationships that we have
Yeah.
with other Christians.
Are we going to get a sermon on that in a few weeks?
Goodness, don't start with me, Parker.
Well, that's, we're going to have the discipleship within the
Oh yes,
mentorship within the church.
yeah, yeah. Hopefully, yeah.
Oh yeah. That's the last one.
Mhm.
That's the last
Yep,
one.
yep.
Titus 2.
All right. So got the call to the Christian wife, the command to the Christian husband, and now exemplifying the church in marriage, and that's really what Paul is. That's like the bomb that he drops, right?
I thought you were going to say this is where you failed to get another C, and then exemplify was as close as I could get.
Comparing the church to the marriage. I don't know.
Yeah, compare, copy. those came up.
Communicating the gospel
Oh,
through
hey.
marriage.
Yeah.
And this is why I wanted to finish my notes earlier to shoot them over to you, so you had time to review. You could have helped me there.
Yeah.
But I do think we should be setting an example for the world
Mm-hmm.
in our marriages.
Yeah.
Not to go back and play on the phrase "the world is watching," but the world is watching
Right.
in a different way. And I really loved how, looking into this, it's not a one-way view. It's not a one-way mirror. This is the world seeing Christ and his church in our marriages, but this is also us in our marriages seeing this.
Mm-hmm.
So it really goes both ways, where we can look at Christ and his relationship with us and say, that's how I should act in my role in this marriage. So it's really some. I can't remember what I said. I don't have my notes in front of me, but I look back and it's like, there are times in my marriage where I've got to step back and say, am I acting in my marriage the way I should see the church operate? And what that is, like, okay, I'm the head of the family and I've got my idea of what needs to happen, but then I step back and be like, well, this marriage is a picture of the church. Am I submitting to the lordship of Christ? Am I listening to my sister in Christ? So it's teaching both ways.
So he says this. So he quotes from Genesis 2.
Yeah.
And then he says, this mystery is profound. The Greek word is mega. This is a mega mystery, right? And I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. So a mystery in Paul's language, it's kind of a technical term. It means something that was hidden in the Old Testament and then it's revealed with the coming of Christ.
Right.
So we see it a little bit in the Old Testament. God talks about marrying Israel, and she's unfaithful. And so he sends her away. But now it's revealed in the New Testament in its fullness that it's referring to Christ and the church, and Christ is he's the husband, and he marries his people, and so there's union with Christ. And so this is just this verse has just profound implications. I mean, this is one of the reasons why marriage has to be between a man and a woman, because marriage is saying something about the gospel.
Right.
Whether you want it to or not, your marriage is saying something about.
Right.
So if you're a unsubmissive wife, you're saying something about the church and her relationship with Christ. And if you're not loving your wife, you're saying something about Christ and his church. And if it's two men or two women, you're saying something about
Right.
Christ and the church.
If I was going through this book expositionally and preaching, this would be its own sermon, and I would have leaned a lot more on Hosea, because that's the negative example. But it's very graphic, not like ugly or, but just very clear in how it presents that point.
Right.
I do want to back up there. You've got the LSB, right?
Now I've got my ESV this
I got
morning.
your ESV. I was
I can
curious.
pull up the LSB if you
Well,
want me to.
In that quoting of Genesis, the ESV says hold fast to his wife. There's cleave and there's a lot
I think
of other
LSB
words.
says cleave. I'll double check.
I
I'm
believe
pretty
the
sure that's what it says.
LSB and NASB say cleave, and I want to say
Are you looking for for how he quotes it in Ephesians or what it says in
I think
Genesis?
it's the same in both places. I was just curious what you thought of that, the hold fast, the cleave, because I see it as a cementing is how I saw it
Right.
defined, and I don't hold fast. I don't think it really got that to me, but then I might just be weird.
Yeah, I mean, I think as he's quoting Genesis here, the idea is that these two people are becoming mystically one, which means the primary union is not between a son and his father. It's between a son and his wife. There's a transformation that's taking place, just as when you're regenerated and you're born again, you have a union with Christ, and that is. I don't want to know if I want to use the word transcendental, but it's like it's a total.
We're getting deep on a Monday morning, Jay.
It's a total transformation of a metaphysical reality that is beyond the testing of science. And that's what people don't see marriage that way, but marriage is the same way. When a man and a woman come together in marriage, God is doing something that transcends the purely physical realm.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens when we are brought into Christ through the gospel.
It's cleave in Genesis is joined in Ephesians in the LSB. To your point, I don't talk about transcendental. I talk about identity.
Mhm.
A child is my children. Your children are identified with our family.
Mm-hmm.
When they get married, they're forming their own identity with another person. And so when you think about George, you should also be thinking about Julia.
Yeah.
Like we're so identified together that you could say our names in the same sentence. That they just go together,
Right.
because
It's like
they're
Batman
because
and Robin. You can't think about Batman without thinking about Robin. You know?
Touche.
I guess I don't know where it goes.
You got him.
But they're,
Got
they're,
it.
you
Got
know,
him.
they're in. That's what.
Pull your beard up,
That's
Bert.
what.
Pull your beard up. Let's see your neck turn red.
That's what union with Christ is, right? Well, like our identity is found in Christ. So Christ has died. So it's like we've died. Christ has been raised. It's like we have been raised. He's been exalted. We're seated with Christ in the heavenlies when He comes. Well, He's been resurrected. That's Paul's whole point in 1 Corinthians 15 is that we'll be resurrected too. Where He goes, we go. And it should be the same with the husband and wife. Where the husband goes, that's where the wife is also. And where the wife is, that's where the husband is. Their identity is linked together.
Eternally.
So we're the Mays family.
Yeah.
Right. George and Julia, and then the kids are identified with our relationship. And then when they get married, they leave us and they cleave to their spouse and they form a new identity.
Yeah, we had good marriage advice, I think, and this isn't perfect, but to solidify that reality, it's a good idea that you are at least far enough away from your parents to where, like, your mother and father aren't clinging on to that old relationship and interfering in your marriage. Now, some parents don't have a problem with this at all. You could live right next door to them, and they're going to respect you.
Yeah.
Some don't, and so you kind of have to know your parents, I guess. It wasn't a problem for me. My dad was in the Army. They lived halfway across the world. But we then lived on our own away from both, and I don't think it would have been a problem. But we've seen those problems, I think, in marriages, both of us, where we go, I really think the problem here may be the mother. You know what I mean? She's interfering in this marriage.
And it usually, again, generalization, it's typically the mother, right?
I have seen the father.
Yeah. But it does it puts a burden on that
Right.
new family identity when the mother and father-in-law tried to like still cling on to that.
Right.
that there's two separate family units now,
Right.
and if the mother and father try to be the head of the daughter,
Mm.
then it makes it really difficult for her to submit to her husband and for the husband to take leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That kind of makes you think of a very practical thing, and I think women can do this. Men can do it too, but don't talk bad about your husband like to your mom.
Can I expand on that?
Sure.
Don't talk bad about your husband to anybody.
That's true.
Period. Unless you're in counseling with your pastor.
But and
Even then,
yeah.
just be honest. Don't just
Truthful.
And
yeah,
the
don't just-
reverse
don't
is true.
just- yeah. Oh yeah.
Don't be don't badmouth your wife to anybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're with the guys,
I've never heard
Don't-
either one of you
don't,
complain about your
don't-
wife. I've been around both of you a lot.
it's nothing to complain about, Jay.
Yeah. Okay, George.
That's
Lying is a sin.
that's,
so-
that's like-
Revelation
that's how,
21:8.
that's how you get the points,
Yeah,
Jay.
Yeah.
You're don't say negative things about your spouse.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think you see that in verse 29. No one ever hated his own flesh.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're not going to badmouth yourself, are you?
Yeah.
Well, some people try to
Some
humble brag.
people
but-
must.
The humble brag. I like one point that you brought up, and I think it plays into understanding eternal security too. Christ will never deny his bride, ever. He purchased his bride with his blood. He's never going to deny his bride. There's never going to be a point where he's like, I tried with you for 20 years and you just won't submit perfectly, and so now you're out.
Right.
You're out. You're gone.
Yeah.
And so that plays into understandings of divorce,
Mhm.
and you brought that up.
Well, goodness, if they're cleaved together, if they're joined together, cemented together, then it's a violent ripping apart to divorce.
Yeah.
Like it's a violent act. It's not just a piece of paper. It actually is rending apart something that has been like cemented together.
Yeah, if you see like a brick wall that's been knocked down,
Mhm.
like those don't come apart cleanly.
Right.
And we do have a lot of people in this church that have been affected in one way or another by divorce, and a lot have come through that, and a lot have, I'm thinking of several that have great families now. But I mean, I didn't ask them this, but I think they'll all tell you that there's scars there.
I don't think anyone wants to go through
No,
a divorce.
Yeah, I mean, and like you brought up, divorce isn't the unforgivable sin. It is a sin, and it is bad. It has multi-generational effects, negative effects usually, but it's not the unforgivable sin. So the idea is, who is your wife now? Like, who are you married to now? And this is where you're going to put this into practice. And you need to, with the other failure in marriage, you just need to rest in the grace of God, knowing that He forgives, and He doesn't hypothetically forgive. He really does. So you don't need to keep bringing it up and feeling guilty about it.
Right.
yes.
Yeah.
Is this the end? Is this the end of the
Is
podcast?
this the end? I don't know. Parker doesn't have any notes, so
Um,
I'm at the end of my notes. The last thing I have is, do you believe it?
Yeah.
yeah, and that's I thought that was spot on last week when you brought that up. I think you opened with that, did you not?
It was
towards
it was towards the front. Yeah.
I put it at the front and back because we are sinful people. Like going back to Genesis 3:16, wives don't want to submit, husbands don't want to love. So we've got to ask: do we believe the Bible? Do we believe God's word? Is this true, and do we believe it enough to practice it when it's hard?
Yeah.
So
That's the only way that we're going to prove that we believe it. I mean, we can sit here and say, yeah, husbands should love their wives and wives submit to their husbands, and that's God's design. But if we go home and we are overbearing or uncaring or passive, we're showing that we don't actually believe it. The only way it's Matthew 7, and that really is hopefully what will kind of be in the background of all of these sermons is you're building your house on something, and the wise person who builds their house on the rock is the person that he hears the word of God and he does it. And that's the only way that you can be sure that your house is going to stand, is if you put it into practice.
Good. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's about it. Let's go ahead and shut her down. Thanks for joining us today. It was a good sermon, Parker. Thanks for all the work you put in. We know it's extra work for you because you're also working another job. You're in there in between meetings, and then you're taking your time to try to get to work on the sermon. So we really appreciate all the time and effort that you put in to make a good sermon. It was very helpful and very practical. I encourage you to go back and listen to that. Please give us a like, subscribe, and a share. Maybe download our app. It's been our privilege and our pleasure to talk about the Bible with you. Hope to see you next time. Have a great week. Bye-bye.